Well, the jury has spoken, and Chad Daybell is declared guilty of triple murder by the jury and sentenced to death. But not so fast. And could it actually not happen? Well, we're going to talk about this and a whole lot more on this episode of Charlie Crimebuster entitled Chad Daybell and the Death Penalty. Stay tuned for the fastest minutes in podcasting.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the individuals interviewed and participating in this show and do not represent those of Charlie Crimebuster nor Peacemaker Network. All individuals described or mentioned in the podcast should be considered innocent until found guilty in a court of law. This podcast contains subject matter such as violence and graphic descriptions which may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
Well, hello and welcome to another edition of Charlie Crimebuster. Today we're going to be talking about Chad Daybell and the death penalty. A lot of things about the death penalty that you may not know. We're going to share those in this week's episode. By the way, I'd like to also invite you to join us on our YouTube channel. It is exploding because every week after we release the podcast on Sunday, we have Crime Talk. And in Crime Talk, we talk about the past episode. And we give you a lot more information than you're going to hear in these fast minutes of this particular podcast that we release on Sundays. So I'd like for you to join us. You can go to YouTube and just tag it Charlie Crimebuster. YouTube at Charlie Crimebuster, and you'll find us there. We invite you to join us. Hey, become a subscriber. Hit that like button. Also, hit those notifications so you'll know when the next edition is actually released. Again, that's Charlie Crimebuster YouTube channel. We'd love for you to be a part of that. Also, you can like us on Facebook. You can join us on other social platforms. Now, if you'd like to know a lot more about other episodes, go on over to charliecrimebuster.com. You're going to find all kinds of good episodes there. And to kind of finish up our housekeeping, it would not be right without me giving you an opportunity to go over to peacemakernetwork.com. Here you're going to read about the heroes, those brave men and women who run toward danger instead of away from danger. You're going to learn how you can not only support this podcast, but you can support these brave men and women. I'm talking about the brave men and women of law enforcement. I'm talking about the brave men and women who are our first responders. And of course, the brave men and women who are a part of our great military. You can read all about it over that there at peacemakernetwork.com. All right, now we're going to get down to the nitty-gritty. We're going to be talking about, Chad Daybell. He has been sentenced to the death penalty. And on today's program, I'm going to share with you some things about the death penalty that you may not know. Now, it may sound like when you hear me talk about some of these things that I'm actually advocating against the death penalty. That is not true at all. I do believe in the death penalty, but I believe some people believe in the death penalty for the wrong reasons. You see, there are some people who say, I want this guy to get death because then the family will have closure. Have you ever heard that? Bet you have. But there are people that tell us that that's not necessarily the truth, you see. You see that putting someone on death row may not be the best way for closure. Now, I'm all for closure, but come on, my friend. Do you know, I do not know a family member of a murdered loved one who will ever really get full closure, no matter what the sentence is. There will always be that hole in your heart when a dear loved one goes on before you. And I know that's true of the precious family of Tylee and of course, not only Tylee, but little JJ. I know it's true of many of Tammy's family, that this death penalty, even though they may say it's justice, they're not going to get total closure from it. Besides, if one has a life sentence without the possibility of parole, then some people say there's actually a more chance of some closure with that than there is with closure of the death penalty. Because you see, along with that death penalty is appeal efforts. There's one appeal effort that's automatically in place, even right after the death penalty is given. And then there are a bunch of others that I'm sure attorneys will come up with. He will have an appellate attorney. He'll have all kinds of legal help to help him try to find any loophole at all to try to get this sentence set aside. But if they have the life sentence without the possibility of parole, then someone can say, well, maybe it's all over now. I don't have to think about another appeal. I don't have to think about another trial. I don't have to keep wondering, well, when are they ever going to execute him? When's it ever going to happen? Am I going to be alive when it happens? Because sometimes in the long wait for the execution, well, the victims' families, they already die even before the execution. You see, there is that waiting time, years of waiting time, and so many questions. Whereas with a life sentence, there seems to be more closure, at least some people say. Let me give it to you this way. Phyllis Loya, she's a mother of a police officer, a guy by the name of Larry Lasseter, who was killed in the line of duty. Now, it was quoted in a March 20th article how murder victims' families are responding to the death penalty halt in California. And here's what Phyllis said. She said, I'm 71 years old. I doubt very seriously I will live to see the execution of my son's murder. But I do not want my grandchild growing up and spending 35 or 40 years before he sees that his father's killer execution is carried out. There are families who have waited decades, over 30 to 35 years, and now we're supposed to wait until Governor Gavin Newsom finishes his election stuff because he's decided to put his own personal will ahead by imposing a death penalty moratorium. He blindsided us. He stole justice from us like a thief in the night. You see, people do use closure, and I think it means different things to different people. She goes on to say what it would mean for me in my fight for justice for my son, that it would be complete when his sentence, which was by a county jury, it would be carried out as it should be, which is basically means if we have a law, then we need to enforce it. Give people appellate rights, but enforce the law. So you see, there's a two-pronged thing there. Not only is the fact that you have to wait through all these appeals, but sometimes the death penalty is set aside, like California. Sometimes they're for it, sometimes they're not for it. It's back and forth, and sometimes that can cause more discomfort to the victims, and that closure is not there. Now again, I'm not advocating against the death penalty. I'm just saying that don't say that the death penalty will necessarily give someone closure. There's more to it than giving somebody closure. We're going to talk about some other things about the death penalty that you may not have thought about. We're going to talk about all that in just a moment. But right now, we'd like to take a moment, as we do from time to time in our podcasts, to share with you a crazy crook story. And sometimes, I think that these crazy crook stories, you think we're just making them up. So today, we're going to take the time to play you a recording where you can see and hear, rather, a real-life crazy crook story unfolding before your ears. So now it's time for Charlie Crimebuster's Crazy Crook of the Week. Our crazy crook story today, well, it comes from Washington, a guy by the name of Corey. And Corey was actually going to have his trial on a Zoom call. And he was being tried for driving on a suspended license. And the judge, well, he got a little surprised when he saw Corey behind the wheel of a vehicle. I'll let you hear what happened next.
You stationary? I'm pulling in right now at this second. Yes, I am. All right. What are we doing?
Your Honor, we are respectfully requesting an adjournment in this matter, up possibly 2 to 4 weeks if the court would allow.
Okay. So maybe I don't understand something. This is a driving while license suspended?
That is correct, Your Honor.
And he was just driving, and he didn't have a license. Oh.
That is what the charge is, Your Honor, yes.
No, I'm looking at his record. He doesn't have a license. He's suspended and he's just driving.
That is correct, Your Honor.
Hello?
1 minute, Mr. Harris.
I don't even know why he would do that. So, defendant's bond is revoked in this matter. Defendant is to turn himself into the Washington County Jail by 6 p.m. today. Failure to turn himself in will result in a bench warrant with no bond.
So there you have Mr. Corey, who's so dumb that he decided to go to his Zoom conference behind the wheel of a car when he was actually being charged for driving a suspended license. He did not have a driver's license. And the judge apparently thought he really is dumb. He really is crazy, because he pretty well threw the book at him. And he said, hey, you got to turn yourself in. We're going to put a bond out for you. We're gonna go arrest you if you don't turn yourself in. So this idiot, this crazy crook, who thought for some reason he could get by on a Zoom conference call with his trial for suspended license while he was behind the wheel of a car driving, is indeed Charlie Crimebuster's crazy crook of the week. Hey, getting back to this thing of closure and the death penalty in Chad Daybell's case, I kind of love what we heard from Chad's grandfather. Well, not Chad's grandfather, I'm sorry, for little JJ's grandfather regarding Chad. And he basically said that whatever the jury does, I'm going to be good with it. Whatever they do, I'm going to be good with it. If they find him guilty and give him prison without the possibility of parole, I'm going to be good with that. If they give him the death penalty, I'm going to be good with that. Now, that is a guy who at least is working on closure as much as possible in this particular case. And so this idea that, it's going to give everybody closure, regardless of which way it goes, it doesn't really solve that hole that will always be in the heart of a loved one of a victim who's been murdered. Now, there's another misconception, and that is the fact that it will, let's just go ahead and put him to death. That way it won't cost the taxpayers that much money. Not like putting him up for the rest of his life. Big, big misconception. You see, my friend, convicting someone to death, it is more costly than just giving somebody life without parole, even in the prosecution. You see, examining prosecutions, I guess back between 2005 and 2010, this study found that the cases where prosecutors sought the death penalty, it lasted an average of 148 days from pretrial motions to the sentencing. We know that this last trial was 6 or 7 weeks. Now, cases in which prosecutors sought the life in prison, they were significantly shorter, only lasting around 24 days. So the very cost of the trial itself is more costly. But then beyond that, it is cost involved in housing the inmate. It just costs more. The largest number of prisoners awaiting execution, by the way, actually is from the state of California. So you're going to hear me refer to California. And there was a study that was concluded regarding the overall costs there in California. And my friend, it's just a proven fact when you look at it. Maintaining separate facilities, like in California, there has to be that's why they call it death row. There's a separate facility. That meant that California, they spend an average of $85,000 each year to incarcerate a condemned prisoner. They concluded it would cost the state an average of $45,000 each year to incarcerate someone who has been convicted but not condemned to die. So you got $85,000 for each person each year just to house them, just to get them through the facility of having a death row facility versus $45,000. So there's a difference in that. And then there's just the overall cost. There was a study in Kansas that found out that the cost of a death penalty case was 70% more than the cost of a non-death penalty case. And then, of course, we found in Tennessee, death penalty trials they cost an average of 48% more than the average cost of trials as prosecutors seek life imprisonment. You see, you have all these appeals and all these attorney fees you're going to pay. Now, in Maryland, the death penalty case, it costs 3 times more than non-death penalty cases. $3 million for a single case. So, my friend, this idea that, let's just put him to death because it's going to save us money. It does not save us money. Now, again, I want to point out that some of you might be listening to me and say, well, you may be against Chad getting the death penalty. No, I'm not. I'm for him getting the death penalty. But I believe, my friend, it is punitive. I kind of believe like the scripture says, an eye for an eye. I believe if someone unlawfully causes the death of another person, particularly in a violent and heinous way, that person deserves to die. I don't care that it will cost more money. I don't care that it may take more time. I just believe they deserve to die. But it is a misconception to think, well, let's just put him to death because we're going to save money. Let's just put him to death because, well, it's going to give more closure. And then there's another misconception that I want to mention to you about the death penalty, and particularly in thinking about Chad Daybell. The next misconception is that, well, only the guilty get the death penalty. In other words, everybody that we put on death row deserves to be on death row. Well, they're on death row because a jury or a judge has sentenced them to death. It does not mean that we have not mistakenly put people on death row. We have, indeed, made a mistake sometimes. And it's especially in this day and time that DNA has come to the crime world, we're seeing more and more people exonerated who are or were on death row. Statistics tell us that 197 persons, at least 197 persons, have been exonerated that were on death row. That's right, 197 people that were on death row have been exonerated because other evidence has come to prove that they were not the person that did that crime, or at least it showed real reasonable doubt that they did that crime. They've had new trials, new things have happened, the verdicts have been set aside, and they have been freed, at least 197. And by the way, do you care to guess which state has the most people that have been exonerated on death row? Well, I hate to tell you, it's the state that I'm recording this in right now, the state of Florida. That's right, the state of Florida. We have 30 persons have been exonerated as of this last study. Guess what the second state was? Well, you might not have guessed this, but it's Illinois. Illinois with 22, Florida with 30, Illinois with 22, and that's followed by number 3 with Texas by 16. So there are people who have been sentenced to death, and it was a mistake. Now that's why some people say we should not have the death penalty. I don't agree with that. I believe that statistics will show you that this percentage, as many as they are, 197 people minimum, that even with that percentage, that's not a whole large percentage of people that have been there. And I can pretty well assure you, my friend, that Chad Daybell will not be exonerated of this crime. You see, DNA didn't have anything to do with that. Chad's DNA wasn't found anywhere. He was found guilty by other means. There's no way that DNA is going to come in and find that somebody else did this crime. Now, we know that somebody else did the crime, but Chad was a conspiracy to it. So regardless of the fact that if somebody else did the crime, we know that he conspired with Alex Cox and Lori Vallow, that they conspired together to kill these 3 people. And in July, or August, the last of July into August, we're going to see another trial of another victim. Lori Vallow is going to go to trial, this time for the killing of her last husband prior to Chad. I think Chad's number 5. Her 4th husband, Charles Vallow, that's going to trial. So this conspiracy has involved all these people. Now, it's true they did not charge Chad Daybell with Charles Vallow's murder. They did not have enough evidence to do that. Doesn't mean that they won't. Doesn't mean that they will not uncover enough to bring him there. I believe he was a part of it. He was texting her throughout the time. He was the one who called the funeral home to try to push up the cremation to get this done quick before the police really took a better look at it. I believe he was a part of it, but there wasn't enough evidence to convict him of that. So the point is, when we talk about people being exonerated, There's no way in my mind that I ever see Chad Daybell getting exonerated from this crime. Now, there still may be a way that he doesn't get the death penalty, though. And it could be that he will not actually be executed. You say, well, I don't believe you're saying that, man. He's been tried. He's been convicted. He's been sentenced to death. How in the world could he get out of it? If he's not going to be exonerated, how could he get out of it? Well, I'm going to tell you about that in just a few minutes. But right now, we'd like to take just a moment to share with you, as we do from week to week, what we call news you can use. Some news that might help you in everyday life. And for just a moment break, here is James Buckland, our producer, with news you can use.
Military personnel are more likely to make a suicide attempt or die by suicide if they are experiencing intense emotional pain. This could include depression and trauma, such as post-traumatic stress. Risk for suicide increases when military personnel experience both depression and post-traumatic stress together. They experience things like hopelessness or perceived burdensomeness, self-hatred, unbearability, guilt, and even some disconnectedness. They'll say things like this: things will never going to change, it's always going to be the same. Or, you all would be better off without me. Or comments like this: I'm worthless and there's nothing good about me. Or even, this is terrible, I just can't take it anymore. Or, it's all my fault. And then this one: no one values me or cares about me. You see that last one? No one values me or cares about me. This is what Peacemaker Network is all about. We do care. We do value our first responders, law enforcement personnel, and military, and this is why we shine our light on PTSD and suicide awareness. We need our heroes healthy, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Join the Peacemaker Network today. PeacemakerNetwork.com.
Well, thank you, James, for that, as always, on target. Now, we've been talking about some misconceptions of the death penalty, and we've been relating it to Chad Daybell and his recent death penalty sentence. Now, to reiterate, there are some misconceptions. One, that it costs less money to put somebody to death. That's not true. It costs more money. Two, that sometimes we get the wrong person. That's true. It does. But in this case, I don't believe we did. Another misconception is that it will give people more closure. Doesn't really always work that way. There is another misconception, and also there is a way that Chad may actually skate from getting the death penalty. I'm going to tell you that before we get through with today's program. But I want to share now another misconception. A misconception is, okay, he's sentenced to death. It's going to be all over. Boom, we've got it done. It's going to happen. Well, it is going to happen more than likely, but it's not going to happen soon. It takes a lot of time to go through this appellate avenue that's going to certainly come to the forefront. The appellate attorney is going to find every loophole they can. I know one thing they'll probably examine is the fact that they actually got the date wrong. If you remember, on that article, that document that had brought about the charge. Remember the date screw up that they had, and it was the wrong date, and the prosecution already rested, and it's according to, what people say is that once the prosecution rests, they can no longer amend the indictment. And so the judge did step in, and he did allow them to do that. I'm sure that probably an attorney somewhere is going to pick that up and try to use that to try to say that it was unfair and that he did not get a fair trial. Now, whether they'll succeed in that, I doubt very much they will. But I think that's going to be an example. I guess there is going to be a lot of time. There's to be very honest with you, both Kay and the grandfather, both of them will probably not be alive when Chad Daybell is executed. It's going to take years, sometimes 15, 20, 30, 40 years. It can take that long to get somebody through this. But that does not mean it will not happen. Let me give you a good example. Many of you probably remember Scott Peterson. Scott Peterson, of course, was actually convicted of murdering his wife. That was back in April of, I think it was 2003. Peterson, he said that he went out fishing When he came back, his wife, Lacey, who had been pregnant, late 8 months pregnant, had suddenly vanished. And people were looking all over the place for him, kind of where that movie Vanish comes from. And yet they found that during this time, Scott Peterson was actually involved with an affair with another woman. Well, the jury did hear that, and they did actually, in 2005, they sentenced Scott Peterson to death. But wait a minute. Through that appellate process that I've been talking to you about, well, they came back and it was overturned in 2020. They said that some of the jurors were improperly dismissed. And so there was a problem, and they were able to overturn that. So in 2021, he comes back and he's retried. But this time, when he's retried, he ends up getting, or the sentence is struck and the other sentence is brought in, he ends up this time getting life without parole. So you see, he was on death row. He was sentenced to death, but in 2021, he certainly turned that around, and now he's got life without parole. Now, that's all the way from 2003. Can you see all the years that have gone through that? And right now, we know, by the way, that the Los Angeles Innocent Project has now picked up Peterson's case. That's the nonprofit that has really been responsible for getting a lot of people exonerated. And they are now arguing that he did not receive a fair trial 2 decades ago. Actually, the Innocent Project told ABC News that there's new evidence that can now prove Scott's innocence. And they also point to his constitutional rights being violated during those proceedings. And their own investigation into the disappearance and murders of Lacey Peterson, they said they've already yielded important leads to evidence supporting Peterson's claim that his wife was alive on December the 24th, 2002. That's what KRON4 reported. And they were citing, of course, the Los Angeles Innocent Project. Now, a month after being convicted, he was sentenced to death. And after 2 appeals, California Supreme Court overturned his death sentence, but upheld the conviction in 2020. And Peterson, of course, was resentenced in 2021 to life in prison. Now they have actually appealed to the court, and they're trying to get them to test some DNA that they did not test otherwise. They wanted 14 items re-examined. The judge now has denied DNA testing on all of those except one piece of evidence. He has said that they will test a 15 by 15 inch duct tape that the autopsy found on Lacey's pants. So now if that duct tape comes back with somebody else's DNA on it, it may open up this whole thing of a retrial and may set aside this verdict. Now, there was also a request to go to the original DNA testing regarding a 2002 mattress. There was a 2002 mattress that was found, now get this, in a burned up van near the body. A mattress in a burned out van. And there were people who have actually been interviewed since then that said they saw Lacey, they saw her out walking in that area even after Scott Peterson had already left and gone fishing. So if that is true, if they did see her then obviously Scott Peterson had not taken her to the bay and dumped her body in the bay. So now, is he innocent or is he not? Well, the purpose of this episode is not to go into that, but the purpose of what I'm trying to share with you is that that's the kind of things that can happen in a death penalty trial. Now, Scott Peterson, who was sentenced to death, now is sentenced to life in prison without parole, and there just may be an opportunity for a new trial, and it may be an opportunity for him to actually be declared innocent of this crime. Is he innocent? I'm not going to comment on that right now. We'll have to wait and maybe do a podcast on that one. What do you think? I think it would be interesting. I'm certainly intrigued with what has happened lately with the Innocent Project and Scott Peterson. Now, I did tell you that I was going to tell you a way that Chad may not have the death penalty. I doubt that his is going to be overturned for procedural issues. I doubt that it's going to be overturned because of new evidence. But what might happen is this. Our country goes through highs and lows. We go through times when, my friend, we are very hard on crime, and we go through times when we're soft on crime. We're kind of in that time right now. People are shoplifting and stealing things and are not even going to jail for it. We're living in a time when the criminal justice system is under attack. And there is a loosening of the tight arm of the law. And that means there's going to be more lawlessness. And it could mean that some states could turn around and abolish the death penalty. They could do like California. They could do like other states have done. So 30 or 40 years from now, or 25 years from now, or 20 years from now, or 10 years from now, or 15 years from now, a lot of things can happen. Now, I hope they don't. I think this man deserves death. And I hope it's speedily, because many of us think that justice delayed can be justice denied. But I did want you to look at the whole concept of the death penalty. Hey, what say ye? I'd like to have your opinion on this. I believe that he deserves to die. I believe that he will get the death penalty. But there are possibilities out there, and we need to be aware of those. And those of us who believe in law and order, we need to stand up for it. We need to vote our consciousness when we go to the polls. We need to stand for those people who want to fight crime and put people and monsters like Chad Daybell out of commission. Let me encourage you to do that. You may disagree. You're certainly welcome to. It is a safe place for you to do so. If you'd like to make comments, just reach out to me at charliecrimebuster@gmail.com, charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. You can make suggestions about other programs. You can ask questions. You can even lodge objections and say, I don't agree with you. I would welcome your comments. Also, go to peacemakernetwork.com, become a badge supporter, and don't forget the YouTube channel. By the way, this coming week, we may have a surprise for you. I've asked a dear friend to come on the program as we talk about today's episode on our YouTube channel that we're going to release in the middle of the week. I'm asking him to come and be a guest, and he is a guy who knows a whole lot about prisons. He knows a whole lot about jails. He's a master teacher for correction officers, and he'll give us a really good idea of what Chad is going to face behind bars as he awaits this death sentence. So until this time next time, this is Charlie Crimebuster reminding you, be safe, be alert, for the life you save, it may be your very own.
You have been listening to Charlie Crimebuster. You can find additional podcasts at charliecrimebuster.com. You can also support our first responders, military, and law enforcement communities at peacemakernetwork.com. Or subscribe to our YouTube channel using tag @CharlieCrimebuster. Even visit our Facebook page, facebook.com/CharlieCrimebuster. Or if you would like to make suggestions for future podcasts, please send your ideas to charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. That's charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope that you will join us next week for another exciting crime story with Charlie Crimebuster.